Autumn. Previously on Spirit Science. We fell. We hit rock bottom, and once again began our evolution from square one, only this time as a male species. It was a new beginning. Eventually, humankind had re-evolved to a state where they could understand new information, and the Nacals gave us a boost into civilization. Egypt and Sumer were born. Everything in ancient Egypt was synthetic. They had this entire civilization based around achieving heightened states of consciousness, but they had to do it through tools. Now, we're not going to look at each of these tools individually, but let me give you a brief overview here. This tool was used for transferring vibrations into the body. Along with that were the hook and flail. This little device was a kind of generator to increase vibrations, though there's not too much information available on it. This thing, however, was their most important tool, the Ankh. They saw the Ankh as the secret to eternal life, and they used it not as a physical tool, but as an energetic one. They would use this form and ankh their sexual energy. Now, this could be a huge topic on its own, like how energy travels up and down the body through a vertical tube between 5 energy channels that counter-rotate as they extend through the body, but basically, sexual energy is an incredibly powerful energy. We definitely abuse it today, but what the Egyptians knew was that when you had an orgasm, a very large amount of energy bursts from your root chakra all the way up your spine to the top of your head, and then it gets released. What the Egyptians would do was when the spiral of energy hit their heart chakra, they would ankh the energy out of the back of their body and over their head and back into their body, where they would keep the energy and retain a massive energy boost. In other words, if you take a tuning fork and hit it, it will reverberate for a certain amount of time. Then, if you attach an ankh on top of it and hit it again, it will reverberate at least 3 times longer. The Egyptians were doing this with their bodies. Moving on, when Atlantis was first formed, the Nacals set up something called a mystery school. This is the special type of school where you learn about consciousness, and you learn different aspects of expanding your own consciousness, and eventually getting to a place where you become immortal. It usually took a very long time to achieve this state, and that's why there were only about 1,000 Nacals in comparison to the millions of Lemurians at the start of Atlantis. The first Atlantean to reach the immortal state was a man named Osiris. Ancient Egypt's mythology tells a story about Osiris, a man who was killed and cut up into pieces by his brother in an act of rage, and then the pieces were scattered. This event, perhaps less exaggerated than the myths, actually did happen, and it took place on Atlantis. Osiris's wife and sister retrieved the pieces, and upon returning the final piece, they restored the creative energy flow and brought his spirit back into the body. Through doing this, Osiris became immortal, and he was the first immortal of Atlantis. This story is told throughout ancient Egypt on many temple walls, and I'm going to show you why. Osiris went through the 3 stages of consciousness. The first one was whole, the second was separated from itself, included physically, and the third was whole again. The Nacals used Osiris's understanding of how he became immortal as a template for how others could do it as well, only through consciousness, without needing to be cut up, of course. This eventually became what we would call the religion of Atlantis, but it was more of a deeper understanding that they were following. This template was also used in Egypt, which we will look at now. Through this stair-step evolution, we began to change from the first level of consciousness into the second. Before the fall, we had incredible memories. It wasn't this vague recollection that we have now, but today we might see it as full-tilt 3D holographic memory. After the fall, we still had a photographic memory, and could share these experiences with each other, which is called dream time. It is what the Aborigines of Australia still have today. Through the introduction of writing, however, we began to change from the first level of consciousness into the second. We lost our incredible memories and became very separate from each other and ourselves. Thoth was the one who introduced writing, and if you look at ancient Egyptian culture, it even says, Thoth brought writing to us, as well as many other things. Now that we were in the second level, over time, things began to change, and a very serious problem developed, which if it hadn't been solved, it would have caused a major catastrophe in our own near future. Basically, in Egypt, the Ascended Masters had used Osiris's genetic coding of changing chromosomes to show others the path of ascension. They developed a system of 42 and 2 gods, with a lowercase g. They were actually called Neters. Most will recognize this one. His name was Anubis. There were 42 and 2 Neters who were representative of human chromosomes. Each one of them showed a specific pathway of life or human experience, and people would follow these understandings to learn more about their life or their own reality. The problem developed when both Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt became more separated from themselves, and the meanings of these Neters were lost. Over time, the drawings of these Neters changed, and the meanings changed with them. People had no idea what they meant. Then it got worse, when the Egyptian king Menes merged Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt into a unified country. Menes also merged the belief systems, so now you had 88 gods that people were fighting over to decide who was really God. This was an issue because now they had people not knowing what to believe, completely lost, separated from their understanding of their own divinity and God. Things became separated further, people fought over which gods were really gods. Today we look back and say, wow, they thought there were so many gods, when really, this wasn't the case at all. Even with the help from the Tat Brotherhood, we just couldn't get it right. There was one short period of Egyptian culture that most historians don't really understand. As it's written in ancient texts and hieroglyphs, for 17.5 years there was a bizarre new ruler that completely changed how Egypt was run. And his name was Akhenaten. Before him, there were only kings. Akhenaten was the first pharaoh, which meant that which you will become. He was also, believe it or not, 15 to 16 feet tall, at least that's how he was always depicted, and had an elongated skull. Both of these aspects are related to Christ consciousness. Akhenaten abolished all previous understandings of God and tried to instill a one-God understanding in everyone. After 17 years, the majority of Egyptians revolted and Akhenaten was killed, soon to be replaced by someone else, returning to the old system. What actually happened? To correct the problem, Thoth got the help from Ai and Tia, who were the first immortals from Lemuria, and got them to mate interdimensionally to conceive a Christ consciousness being. Thoth said that he worked with the previous kings of Egypt to help achieve this, and Egyptologists find that Akhenaten came completely out of nowhere. It took some time, and there was a transitional period involving Amenhotep III, but soon Akhenaten was on the throne. Akhenaten used his time to bring Egypt back to a simple religion where there was one God, one reality. He used imagery of a sun disk to represent this. The priests in Egypt didn't like that because the religious beliefs were centered on the priests. Then he comes along and says, you don't need priests, God is within you, and you can access God from within your own selves. Well, they didn't like that. He also pulled the military back and said, don't attack unless someone else attacks first. The military didn't like him either. Plus, the people generally didn't like him because they enjoyed worshipping their many gods. Eventually, they disposed of him. After all that, what did Akhenaten do that evidently saved humankind? Well, he developed a mystery school, with the intention of showing a small group of humans a way to ascend into the immortal state. Usually, it took hundreds of years to reach the level of immortality, and Akhenaten had 17 years to produce results. This was a very close call, but he did it. He actually showed 300 individuals the path to immortality in this short time. So after the general population disposed of Akhenaten, these 300 immortals would go beyond Egypt.